Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Agne. We talked about risky choices, the unique challenges of continuously improving and being in a bubble. I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, hello everyone, and hello with me. I have Agne. Is that how I should pronounce your name?
Yeah, this is right. I'm Agne. Hello.
Hello, and for the people that I want to show a little bit, and that is the part where somehow swapping screens give a problem because I want to show where we are in the world, and and let's first move to my place. I'm in Ghent, and so that is in Belgium, and then we go directly to your place, and we go to Vilnius, if I'm correct.
Yeah, it's not far away actually.
It's not that far away. And what is it time zone wise? On my side, at this point, it's let's say 15 minutes after 5. What's the time on your side?
15 minutes after 6. So just 1 hour difference.
Just 1 hour difference. So it shows that, yeah, that's a little bit. And this is partially why I'm asking, because it shows people like, okay, in Europe, we still have some time differences. It's not that far away. During the day, I'm working with a lot of people who are in Lviv in Ukraine. That's also 1 hour difference. So I'm used, but I have also people, that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis in India, so yeah, this is the world that we're living in. I would say a little bit time zone differences, trying to collaborate.
Oh
So
yeah, I remember when I was working with Americans and their time zones. So if it's East Coast, then it's easy. But if it's West Coast, then either you're having calls after your dinner time, or people are, waking up at 5 a.m. just to see you first thing in the morning. So that's a little bit tricky.
yeah, exactly. Well, some of the recordings I've done here on the show were people from Australia. So then it was indeed something similar, 12-hour difference. And that was either midnight at my place or yeah, whatever. It was always sometimes a little bit tricky, but also nice to see sometimes in that way. Now, before we jump into the questions, could you say a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and what you want people to know about you?
So I'm Agne. I'm agile coach. I'm also agile consultant. I try to figure out what's the difference between consultant, mentor, coach, and all other words, and when should I be which one. So that was my job for last year. I have two kids at home, 5 and 2 years old. And yeah, I love traveling. I love speaking at conferences. So if I meet you there, please come and say hello. Um, and I love being here with you tonight, actually. I'm really enjoying it so far.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, so far, for the people that don't know, of course, we just had a pre-talk a little bit for 10, 15 minutes. I've actually been in Vilnius. I've been trying to remember when I was the last time in Vilnius. But yeah, I really like that city. So it's yeah, yeah, again, it's a long time ago, so that's why I don't remember much of it. But still, I do remember going there with my family, or with my partner at least. So let's jump into the questions. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
For this one, I believe people don't know most of the things about me because I'm not a very public person. But the one that might be interesting is that actually my background is in political science. And when I had to defend my bachelor's thesis, my topic was war comics. And I was reading a lot of comics, trying to analyze them and their visual expressions, and how to use them in some areas where journalism is impossible because of the war state. And
Hmm.
only years later, I realized that actually it's very helpful at work because what you have when you are reading a comic book is that you see the future and the past simultaneously, because you open the page and you see a lot of different scenes all at once. You don't have this chronological reading as when you have, when you're reading a simple book. And this experience and this, understanding how to get out of the linear thinking is something that I use when I work with product people right now. When we go from this, linear thinking, how we split product development from point A to the very last thing, into something more iterative, less linear, right? So that was an insight for myself that, actually, I'm using theory about how to read a comic book on product development things.
That's interesting. And how did you discover that? If you the link between these two, I would say.
Um, I was having a chat in a conference, and we were just talking about this difference between, okay, so what's linear, what's not linear, and how do we grasp that? Because, everybody can read a book, a lot of people know the theory, but there is this shift in mindset that has to, you should get it at some point. Like, what does it mean not to think about it in a linear way? And I just tried to go back and see when it happened to me. And I was going back through all my careers in, agile world and product development, and I didn't find that point, because when I got there, I already had this thinking that there are a lot of things that are not linear. And when I had to go back and back, I'm like, oh, actually, I found it. It was a comic book. Very unexpected.
Yeah, that's indeed a very nice story, but it shows already a little bit on how we discover some of these things.
Yeah.
So that's yeah, and thanks for sharing, because it's like, well, you say if not many things are public, then but it's a very interesting. How would I say it? It's an interesting discovery in a way, especially if you then say, okay, it's coming from a comic, like you didn't see that coming in a way, but I guess many people might not realize that. It reminds me. It's a little bit different, but at the same time, I saw there is a, how's it called, a mini series. Well, I wouldn't call it a movie, but there was a mini series in Belgium where they showed the same event. It was a bank robbery. They showed 24 hours, but they showed first. The first episode was from the point of view, I think, from the police, and then they showed the same time frame from the bank robbers, and then in the second episode, and the third episode was the next couple of hours from the police again. And it was so interesting because it's the same thing, but you see it from a different point of view. And it's like, whoa, okay, now you learn about different kind of things. I found it very interesting because it was also, yeah, if you want to look back, you have to rethink about where should I, it's not linear, because I learned it from which episode again, and I learned parts it's in and you were always put on, you learn something else, but you never know the full reality until, of course, then at the end, because that's of course how things are made. But yeah, it was very interesting for me to have the same thing look on from different sides. And I think that's a little bit what it's a different thing, but you, like you say, I see the current thing, I see the future, I see it's a similar kind of thing to look from different angles. Yours is time, in our case it was a viewpoint. And
And
how did it, yeah, so
go ahead.
how, how did that influence you in your world?
The part that I realized that not all the things are linear. Um, that's a good question. I just stopped looking for a particular beginning and particular end. That's for one thing. And a lot of things, they don't have the end. They have some stops where you validate things and you move on. So that validation concept really growed on me. And another thing could be, I don't know, actually, just thinking about a lot of potential consequences and different pathways simultaneously. that maybe also coming from there. But mostly I just like it for entertainment purpose. Actually, I mean, it was an accidental insight that is helpful for my work. But right now I just love, graphic novels, as something that I can enjoy reading and enjoy looking at.
Not everything should be about work, so that's definitely fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again, we have influences in all kind of things, so that is indeed interesting. Okay, I want to move to that second question, that if you had not been doing what you've been doing now, what would have become of you? Do you have any idea? Was there anything that you were destined to become when you were younger?
Is there a destiny in the first place?
I
um,
don't know. Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
I never knew who I want to be. Maybe I don't know even now. But I had multiple ideas when I was growing up, from owning a zoo to becoming an investment banker. Maybe one of the more realistic things, professions I could take, was a musician. I was playing classical guitar for a lot of years. And there was really some time where I was thinking, okay, I think I'm meant to do that. I'm good at it, and there are a lot of people and contests that confirm that. Um, and then there was this one conversation. Then I met a guitar player who got into a car accident in Paris. And after that accident, he couldn't play anymore because something happened with his left hand. And I realized that, okay, there are a lot of things and a lot of professions I could take. Um, but I know what I don't want to do. So I basically rejected all of the professions for which you need some physical excellence, basically, because I thought that this might be a risky choice for me, moving on in my life. Because if one car accident can, change all of the work you did for so many years, and you cannot,
Mhm.
pursue your career anymore, that's very risky. So that was the time when I realized that this can only be a hobby. But
And is
I'm
it still a hobby?
no, actually, I don't remember how to play guitar anymore.
Ooh!
Ooh, that's tough, right? But actually, I would do that again, because it taught me a lot of things. For one thing, it taught me how to listen, and that's very interesting part about playing a musical instrument, because a lot of people think that playing means, uh, you know, creating something for the world, sort of. When in reality, it's a lot of consumption, basically, and a lot of environmental awareness of what's happening around in during your performance. And if you want to play really well, listening is very, very important skill. So I learned to listen very well while doing other things and performing. Um, and it also taught me deep focus, because to be able to participate in various contests and play in the band, I had to play for several hours in a row, for example. So you need to focus. That's a good skill to have. And um, and and I guess while a lot of people were doing some team sports, so playing in a band was my type of team sport, where you play with people, you learn about teamwork, you learn how to read each other's body language. If something goes off, for example,
Hmm.
your band member forgets notes, and suddenly the rest of us has to adjust somehow and improvise and still remain together, because remain together and still play together is more important than doing things right, because the right thing
Hmm.
is do it together. This is the priority. So doing something where teamwork itself as a process is prioritized over the output we create, basically. But I think that's a valuable thing, valuable lesson. Not a lot of people
And
have.
and and with how many people were you playing together typically, if you're talking about?
Typically four, so not a lot, but still counts.
Well, yeah, but if something goes wrong, it's much easier to notice. If 20 people are playing and one person forgets a note, the audience might not notice, but if there's four and one person forgets something, it's very visible, I would say.
Especially if you're the one playing only the one playing high notes or the bass, right? So you have very particular
Exactly.
line. That's right.
Exactly. That, yeah, but I did think that is indeed, yeah, important to realize and to think. And I really like that that link between teamwork. It's like you say, we sometimes say that teamwork is a lot in sports, but actually a lot of agilists, even on this show, a lot of people are coming from a musical background, and a lot of people are telling very similar kind of things. Indeed, working together. I was, and I'm trying to remember which was it, but I was at an ex- yeah, I don't remember. I was at the conference where at some point it might be XP in one of the Scandinavian countries where we were looking into a jazz concert and the people were playing. It was also three or four people, and they looked at each other, and they would start playing at a random time, stop playing all at the same time, but just like I was sitting rather close and I just couldn't see their body movements that would predict that something would happen. But like you say, if you know each other very well, you probably just only need to blink or do something with your whatever, and to see it. And it was incredible because that was really a play where they played on how do we play together, and yeah, it was wonderful to see.
Yeah, we had this thing where we would follow each other's breathing patterns to know what, other person is going to do. So then you have to be very, you have to control yourself very well not to start breathing somehow differently, because it might become a signal.
Mhm. That yeah, but like you say, this is how you learn. And of course it's a different kind of working together as you have in a software team, but you are at least you're aware of patterns. And like I really like how you said it, it's not so much about not making mistakes, but it's like making sure that together we deliver something. And if it's now a musical play, or if it's indeed some software, it's always also some kind of interaction with a customer, because a customer might misunderstand something. You need to rearrange something, and in a concert there might be somebody shouting, or indeed somebody forgetting a note, or I literally my one of my uncles is in an orchestra. The how's it called? The conductor. And I was as a 10-year-old or something. I went to a concert where there was a girl crying coming later to him, and it's like, no, you shouldn't cry. I was forgetting a part in that. I forgot. I turned the page too much, and I forgot something, and that's what distracted you. Everybody else was better able to do, but this was your first concert, so it's pretty okay that it took you a while to realize. But the error was on my part as a conductor, and yeah, so I forgot. And so yeah, it's and this is I don't know much about it anymore because it's a long time ago, but I do remember that conversation that he said, like, okay, it's something we need to learn, and of course we shouldn't do it, and we need to practice that. I sometimes make things different in the practice round, but it was such an interesting conversation, very similar to what you're saying. Somebody makes a mistake and we need to be able to. And personally, in that concert I didn't notice it because yeah, I did notice the play, what they were doing, but I didn't notice that they skipped the part. But of course the musicians all knew that very well. um, so yeah, that's a little bit what is happening. But thanks for sharing that. I think it's really interesting kind of stories on how we learn collaborating from the musical part. So thanks. I want to move to that next question about what do you consider your biggest challenge and why is it a good thing for you? And of course, the biggest challenge that you want to be out open in the internet.
um, yeah, there are a lot of challenges. I think that no one's perfect. My challenge from my early childhood was that I tend to get bored very quickly, which make makes it difficult for me to do, for example, routine tasks. I can't do that. If it's repetitive, I just lose my focus and lose ability to perform in that environment. And for some time I was struggling because at school it was a lot of repetitive tasks, or you have routine, how you have to do things and so on. But actually, it became a very good thing when I started my career development, because of the fact that I get bored very quickly. I realized that my field must be connected with continuous improvement,
Mm.
because this is the field where there's no repetition. And if you are solving the same problem in the beginning of the year and you are still solving the same problem in the very end of the year, well, maybe something went wrong, because the purpose is to improve and empower people around you to solve their problems or eliminate these problems so that they don't occur anymore. And the idea is that, okay, first when you start, maybe there are some low-hanging fruits, some ideas that you saw some people or teams or leaders already solving. Maybe you read something in a book, but as you go on, there are no low-hanging fruits anymore, and these challenges or problems or issues, they become more and more interesting to the point where, okay, this is a very unique situation, quite unique challenge. I've never dealt with that before, and I have to figure out on spot what do we do about it. Um, and it gets more and more challenging, and thus more and more interesting, right? It's never repetitive in a way, because there is no end of improvement, and that connects with that comic topic, right? There is no one particular end. Basically, you just keep going, keep the circle turning. So yeah, I think that each person is unique, and it the success really depends if you find your place, right? And if you find and focus not on what's your challenge, but okay, if this is challenging, so what I'm good at. So if it's challenging for me to do repetitive tasks, maybe I'm good to do things on spot. Actually, there are a lot of people who feel safer doing routine tasks, and they are looking for this routine and being predictive, that their day is predictive, that the place from they are working is predictive. They go to their desk, they see their nice little plant, they have their safe space to think. And I don't need that. Actually, it's not inspiring for me. So I can do completely different things, and that opens completely different doors, basically.
That's really interesting. And if you compare that, so you say we improve some things and that makes it different. If I would go back again to, for example, the moment that you were playing guitar, um, there practicing, it feels also like repetitive. Was that different, or is that also the improvement there that kept that from being repetitive, or how should I see that?
It's repetitive if you think about the technical part. For example, you have
Mhm.
to learn how to um, create specific sound, and it might take some time. Then you learn to make it nice, but then you start listening, and this is why I emphasize the first thing that it taught me is to listen first before thinking what to do and next. Then it's not repetitive at all, and there were some um, musical pieces which would sound very different on, I could play them 6 times and it could sound like six different pieces, because the first time I say, okay, this is how I would play it if I were sad. This is how I would play it if I was playing it to my mom. This is how it would sound if I would play it for myself. This is how it would sound if I want to make it into a lullaby, and just you start listening,
Mm.
and suddenly it sounds different, and it's not repetitive, and it's basically also why being bored easily is a good thing, because maybe some people would never think to play the same piece differently. But for me, okay, so I know that I have to play it 10 times tonight, otherwise my technique is not good enough. But I cannot do routine tasks. I cannot play 10 times the same way. So I need to find 10 different characters of the same piece to keep myself entertained. And that experimenting with, having, okay, I have the same notes, but it can sound different, would also, teach me how to experiment and how to make things different as I go, and maybe find some interesting alternatives to the traditional way how the piece is being played most of the time.
I really like that because it's indeed the fact that you kept it interesting by playing it in different versions. Like you say, it keeps it fresh for you. I can imagine that if you're doing at some point performance and you I don't know, you notice that somehow people would be more interested in a certain different version that you could actually start playing. Of course, your band has to be, or your group of people where you play have to be ready for that. But yeah, if you did all some of these practice sessions together, then that would even make it interesting for me as an audience, because I can go 3 times to the same show and see something different and still
Yeah.
appreciate it. Or I might say, well, the night's version I didn't like, the one from yesterday I like more. But that's again, that's taste, and that keeps it also interesting for me, which is also good for your audience, because of course, if I'm a band and if I go as an audience, yeah, how do you keep it interesting for me? If it's literally the same show the day after, why would I go again? Yeah, then your audience dries up, or you need to have a very big audience, but people who then only go it once or twice. And if you keep it interesting, so that's and so, but I want to go a little bit to that second part. Why is that a good thing for you? You already said a little part about that when you're getting bored, but is there more to that part?
Why it's a good thing for me?
Yes.
I think that any challenge we have as people can be good for us because it teaches us how to accept ourselves and how to think about our, um, strong parts, weak parts, and what to make out of it. And accepting the fact that I might get bored very fast, which, may not be an easy thing to do for particular people. For example, for me, it was very difficult to admit any drawbacks in myself because I lived in an environment where it was important to be, good at everything basically. Um, it it's part of personal growth journey, right? And to shift the thinking from, okay, this is what I can't do, to the part where, which is how I can thrive, and which this is how I can become even better person, or this is how I can find out about my true passion. It's a practice in shifting the mindset, and just as process, I think it's beneficial. I use it even today in my coaching sessions with people, right? Because people are quite fast at observing things that go wrong, or where they think they are doing, not so well, or noticing their drawbacks, or noticing some misbehavior in their environments, and being able to shift that mindset. Okay, so if we're saying that this is what we can't do, what's the opposite, what we can do, or which doors when it opens, or how we could benefit from that, and how to do that smoothly, that mindset shift. um, that's a that's a good thing to know how to do that. So I always see, there is this direct benefit. So, okay, I know that I cannot focus on routine tasks. So that might mean that I'm good at spontaneous tasks. Let's see, how I can work in the environment where I need more, and have to perform in spontaneous environment. And that might mean continuous improvement and so on. This is direct implication. But then during this process, my secondary reflection is, okay, so while I was doing this, how I thought about this process, where my mind was, how did I figure this out, and how can my personal journey become some sort of process which I could use in coaching other people through their thinking, and going from this challenge they have to something they can use, right, for their benefit. So it's a dual thing.
Thanks for sharing that, and I really like that. Yeah, the the meta level that you add to that, because it's really like, okay, it's thinking about your process while you're doing stuff or immediately after or after it. I really like that part because I think it's what's so beneficial for many people. um yeah, then when it's tempting to forget that part, I would say, but I think it's the beneficial part if we can indeed think at a different level than just the action, taking time to do that. So I really appreciate that. So that's yeah. Um, Thanks for sharing that. Let's move to that next question. What is something that drives you? And before we is that yeah. So, it is there something that you know where that's coming from, that drive?
Mm, I don't know where it's coming from, but the drive I have is taking a piece of information from one context and using it in completely different context. So it might be coming from the fact that I have a lot of context to mix and match because I had this experience in political science, which basically teaches you nothing except how to be good in small talk about different conversations, because it's a lot of different areas, but you don't go deep. I had my master's studies in financial economics, so a little bit numbers, a little bit analytics, right? And then during my career, and in last 10 years, I changed either my career path or company or industry maybe 7 times. And it's not that it was a linear path. It was going back and forth and trying different things. So I guess at some point I just collected enough dots to start connecting and start making sense out of it, and became this generalist basically. And right now it really drives me. For example, I really love reading books. This is my thing. If I have time, I take a book. I also use a book to keep learning about things at work as well. And there are a lot of great books. Actually, I'm fascinated how many people around me had written a book for themselves. Like, wow, okay, you wrote a book and you wrote a book. This is so cool. And but then I go to the conferences, for example, and we start talking, and it feels like we're in a bubble in a way, right? So on social media, I follow people which I find interested, but for in many cases I agree with their opinion, and then I select which books to read, and I select books for my work. They're also related with agile world, with some leadership, some strategy maybe, right? So it's still my bubble, and we sort of, at some point, it starts feeling like we are tapping on each other's shoulders and we are just having the same one opinion, you know, reconfirmed in a new way. And I'm not saying that we don't have to read these books, because imagine if you are in the same conference talking to 10 people and you're the only one who haven't read that book, then you're suddenly an outsider. So it's more feels like it became a hygiene to read particular books, so you could be in particular conversations. But to add an extra layer on that, what I really like and what drives me is to just think or read or watch or just consume information from very different fields. For example, my husband, he's in marketing field, and naturally we have a lot of books about marketing or sales even. I read all of them if I have time. And I really like that. I remember we had this book club in one of the companies I was working at, and we could all, one by one in sequence, suggest our book. And I suggested this book by Dave Trott, Creative Mischief. And everybody read it, and then we started reading it. It was a group of scrum masters, coaches, and they were like, this is a book about marketing, why we are reading that? And by the end of the book, I received a lot of feedback that, wow, actually, it's one of the most useful books for coach I've ever read.
Hmm.
Even though it's from a very different field, because it's constructed in a way that it has a little story and then a little conclusion in the end. That conclusion is linked with marketing. But if you take the story without marketing conclusion and make conclusion for yourself, it suddenly become a book about agile. You just need to change conclusion a little bit. I also really like the book by Rory Sutherland. It's called Alchemy: The Surprising Things About Ideas That Don't Make Sense, something like that.
Hmm.
And it's about ideas that don't make sense. It challenges your perception about the world, and it's definitely not about agile. But basically, I read such books, and then I can add this extra layer to the
That's the book that you're talking about, right?
no, this is not the one.
Ah, okay.
Um, it's called Surprising Things of Ideas That Don't Make Sense, and it's golden. Um, so yeah, so you'll find it. Um,
But I thought, wait, let me check again. Uh, no, it's not. Interesting because I have another link to that book where. Uh, okay, I made I copied the wrong.
okay, but
Mm.
yeah, I can send the link, and you can add it later for the reference. But the whole point is that, for example, I'm not a creative person, right? I
Mhm.
find it very hard to come up with creative ideas. So basically, what drives me and when I'm getting excited is I read things outside my natural bubble, and then suddenly people think that I'm creative because I just bring these dots and connect to their context, basically. And I think anybody can do that. It's just that sometimes we don't think we can. It feels that we are somehow, I don't know. We just forbid ourselves. I remember last year I was in a conference, and I was Agile 2024 or 2023 in Orlando, and I met one person who is in HR field, and that person was very very excited, and he said, "I finally met a coach who promised to do the training for HR people, like Agile training for HR people." And I was like, okay, so how the outline would look like, what would you learn as a chat person in this field?
Mhm.
And then that person gave me an outline of how the training would be structured. And I'm like, this is the same thing we are having in our training for any other person, like not HR, basically. It's the same thing. It's just that it's not called HR training, even though the content is the same thing. And I realized the power of you know saying okay to people. For example, okay, so now you're in a different field and I will make it special for you, it will be adjusted, while in reality it may not be even adjusted. We just okay the situation that that person who is in completely different discipline is okay to come and listen and be part of this, maybe different industry, maybe different community. And
Mhm.
actually, we can do it for ourselves. Each of us can say ourselves, this is fine. Maybe I'm not in HR, but I'll go to HR conference. Maybe I'm not in sales, but I go to sales conference. Actually, I've been attending sales training several times. I love that, even though I don't have anything to do with sales. So it's just our choice if we want to get out there and see what's happening out there outside our bubble. And for a lot of times, actually, it's quite reusable. I call it idea recycling. You just take it from somewhere where it works and bring it into your own context.
Yeah, and I do think, well, as if we're working as an agile coach, or if we're working as a scrum master, we sometimes have to also sell IDs to our teams, and teams have to sell IDs to their managers and others if you want to go in a certain way. So in that sense, I definitely see the value of understanding sales about if you focus on your customer, what your customer wants, and can I explain in the language of the customer how what I want to do is actually value them. I definitely see a lot of value in these kind of things. So thanks for sharing that. That's already, and you already went ahead in to talk about the book, but that's fine. I want to move to that other question about achievement, and the question below that question is that so basically this is your moment to shine, to brag. Is it easy for you as a person to brag? Is that something that is easy to do?
I think yes. I'm not happy about that. I don't know. Somehow, at least in my environment, it was always it was not encouraged to brag about yourself.
Mm.
So I'm surprised how good I am at this, even though it was discouraged. But I don't know. The first thought was I created two human beings, and I don't know if anything I'll ever do can beat that. But if not from personal life, as you might have noticed, I have this, direct things like, okay, this is direct achievement. For example, I opened my own consultancy firm, huge achievement, right? My and
Mhm.
my colleagues, partners, baby. But I really like to analyze this meta level about, okay, so what did I learn through this process, or what happened in there? And then I think long term, from my childhood to this moment, I was always this geek kid, very very nerdy, and I learned very quickly this Pareto rule of 80-20 thing, that you can very quickly learn things until 80%, but it takes a lot of effort to actually learn that top 20% and be really really good at. And for a lot of times, it wasn't even needed. And for most of the cases, I don't even remember what I was learning. I mean, these news are not somehow useful for me right now. But what happened through these years when I was doing that, I established a pattern of self confidence that I can learn anything under
Mhm.
any circumstances. For example, I got into this political science thing, and then I realized, okay, I want to do something else. And I switched to financial economics. And there were a lot of super skeptical people. What are you doing here without any background in economics or finance or anything like that? And I ended up being the first in our group, basically, like top student. Um, and I switched careers, as I said, multiple times later. And basically, what happened in that, it's not what exactly I learned. It's not about the level of information I consume or the level about knowledge. It's about this knowing deep inside that whatever happens, I can deal with that. And that pattern of being able to learn anything under time pressure, under people comments, or whatever happens, um, that brings a lot of courage to do things that I maybe wouldn't do otherwise, including opening my own consultancy in times of turbulence. So I feel pretty proud about that. It's not, as I said, something that very directly linked, but I learned this thing, and it's very useful now, or I did this or that. But I'm more proud about the pattern I managed to establish over the years, that gives me confidence for upcoming years.
I really like that because it's indeed what you achieve doesn't always have to be. For many people, it's like one big thing, and but you're not the first one here on the show who talks about no. It's just it's the pattern or it's the complete path that I did, and that's like yeah, and this is why in the question it also says so far because there's definitely hopefully a lot more to achieve. But I really like that you stress out that part that you're also, casually, you mentioned, well, I was in an education where people say, "What are you coming to do here?" Because you have nothing there, but you end up as being the best in the class or in the first in the class, and it's like, yeah, it's like it's almost casually, and I think it's partially because you have nothing before there. You'll probably need to work twice as hard as anyone else, but yeah, you are able to do that, and then you bring in knowledge from other people, and that sometimes people, if they are studied in a certain direction, they only know this and they can't make links, while you, what I'm hearing as a generalist, you make links with different kind of thing, and that gives you that wealth of knowledge, I would say, that helps you then. Of course, the further you are and the more changes you make, the more you learn and the easier it is. But still, I can imagine that you still, every time you go into a new direction, you, it almost feels like you have to start from zero. You have a big backpack that helps you, but still,
Yeah.
there is still a lot to learn every time, I think. And how you also casually mentioned that people were like, yeah, looking strange to you. How was that for you as a young person when you did that? When people reacted that way to you? Did that challenge you? Did you feel
Yeah, it
offended?
did. It really did. I guess
Um,
I'm quite competitive in my heart. So when somebody says
mm,
you can't do that, it's like you don't know
I'll
me.
prove you.
Of course I can do that. Even if I don't know how yet. Like, okay, first I'm gonna say I'm gonna do this, and then I'll figure out how I'm gonna do this. But first I'll say
And
yes.
And is there also a risk that you sometimes take on too much because of the challenge? I mean, because I can imagine that people like you might be more vulnerable for burnouts or stuff like that because you do something, you want to go all in. Is there a risk with you, or is that I don't know?
Yeah, I think there is a risk there, and that's why it's important to have a good support system. In my case, it's my family, and I do receive comments where they say, "Okay, now we're going on vacation," or "No, please don't take this additional thing on top because I don't think it's a good thing for your health," for example. And during years, I learned to listen, so that's very helpful.
You learn to listen. So I so recognize that sometimes people around us are better at picking up some of these clues, like maybe it's time to take a step back or not take anything else on top of that.
Yeah,
I really like how you say it. Learn to listen, because that's that. But that support system is so important. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go that question in that direction, but I'm glad I did, because it shows how important it is, even for if people who did achieve and do really great stuff. If you're coming from not knowing anything and becoming the first, it shows that you're capable of doing stuff, big things, and at the same time, it is also important that people around you warn you for, wait a minute, maybe this is now better to, because in the end, it will help you to achieve your next thing even better, or the other things that are already on your plate, I would assume. So,
exactly.
so thanks for sharing that extra part there. Let's move to, and we're talking about personal. Well, let's talk a bit about a personal agility tip. Is there anything that you want to share?
Um, the word personal confuses me here, but one of the key things for me in agility and how I understand that and what I use in practice is that we have to validate our assumptions. And when I started working in agile field, what I learned is that there are way more assumptions we are using as facts than we think, especially in our communication. And first I started learning, from product side. Okay, so we have product, we have assumptions. Output and outcome is not the same thing. We might, create solution, but it's not solving the problem, or we might made a mistake, prioritizing a problem in the first place, and so on. So it started very directly, about value and product and these things. And then I started thinking, okay, so what are other feedback loops we need to have? So what are the feedback loops, to reflect processes? What are feedback loops to reflect our plans? And that reflections got into my personal field, as you noticed during the conversation, and it got also into how I observe conversations we're having as people. And during last years, I really noticed myself that when I'm talking to people, I observe like, okay, in this sentence, you made two assumptions of which one is not factually true. So, can we
Mm,
get back and validate it before we move on? Because otherwise we are not on the same page. So that's the first thing. And then it gets into this, deeper level of self-awareness, how we communicate and what assumptions we make. And quite important for me is to be explicit about things that are important rather than implicit, because we just think that people take it as a common sense. But as person coming through very, very different fields, I know that there is no such thing as common sense. And I've really been in situations where, 10 people are talking and using a lot of buzzwords, and it's all common sense. And I'm just trying to write these things down as I hear them, and then trying to Google. First, I Google how to write them correctly, how to spell them. Then I Google what they really mean until it becomes common sense for me as well. Um, and going even deeper, I also learned, thinking about these feedback loops and the fact that we need to validate our assumptions. I learned about my personal triggers. For example, that when people are talking, they use particular words, and I might react not to these words or the intent of the conversation, but to my previous experiences. Let's say in Lithuania, we have this thing where people are calling adult women girls, and it has very historical. I don't know how to say that, but basically, there is a historical reasons why it triggers me to when I hear people calling that, and then I was like, oh, but this is just my assumption about what it means based on some previous experience or historical cultural experience, instead of actually reacting to the intention of a person is having. So I need to validate what's the intention in these words before I react and respond correctly. The same goes when I hear human resources. That one triggers me as well.
But it's an interesting thing that you add there, because there is no holy truth, in the sense that what triggers you is part of the truth, and what another person means is another part of the truth. And yeah, I try to do the same thing. Like resources, I really hate it when people asking that, because I know that many people are triggered by that and feel like, they're not valued. Many managers don't even realize it when they do. Yeah, but it's common sense. It's common. Yeah, just know that. Uh, I know that some employees like to talk about managerial overhead, but most managers don't like to hear that. So even if they might mean it as a joke, these employees, managers won't like to hear that. Just like employees don't like to have be called resources or women, girls, and everything like that. I have the same thing for guys. It's also for I know a couple of people who only work with women but still call them guys. Like, this I don't think it makes sense. And again, it's people thinking in one way, but not always realizing. And I think it's really good, like you say, for both parties to think about, okay, what triggers me? Why is that triggering me? Um, and have a conversation about these triggers, also to make people realize that you're the one who might say it, but there might be 10 others who don't say anything about that. And it's good for you also, like you say, to realize, okay, this is where that trigger comes from something happening somewhere at another part. Maybe that other person doesn't mean it in the same way. So it's good for both parties, or for all parties, to think about what does it actually mean, at what kind of level do we want to use that word. And I've seen it's actually one of the conversations I had today also with some scrum masters about, we need to double and triple and quadruple check our assumptions in all kind of directions. And we were talking about initiative that we launched, and and that person said, but that was said before. And I know I've said it also for my part. I know that I've shared at least a couple of times this whole initiative, and if people don't understand it, it's because I didn't do a good job, and I need to keep repeating it, because it's easy for me to say, but I've shared it, and so it's their problem. No, it is my problem. If I want things to change, I need to be able to repeat it enough so people realize what's the goal and why we're doing some stuff. But it's hard. Communication sometimes is very hard. I need to repeat it multiple times, and every time I think, is it now clear? There's something else. Well, well, it's already hard in a relationship. It's already hard as a parent sometimes. It's even harder with people we don't live with, and a team where everybody has their own opinion about what a certain sentence or a certain thing means. So thanks for adding that. I think it's a very powerful thing to do with teams. Let's move to that next question. What have you, and where is it not showing? Yeah. What have you learned about remote working? Or maybe go to the question before the question. Did you do a lot of remote work before COVID? Because a lot of us learned remote work before COVID. Did you do something before?
No, actually, I haven't done remote working before COVID. Maybe a little bit, but very limited amount. So I mostly learned that during COVID. I'm doing it ever since. I'm still most of the time working remotely. Um, and for me, I don't know. I hear a lot of opinions that remote work disconnect people, which I don't think is true. And For me, remote work is sort of multiplier, something that shows where the problems are. For example, if I don't have enough trust in my colleague and I used uh, particular ways to manage that person, to work with myself to bring that trust in place, because I see, I can touch, I can feel, it's easier to basically trust that something is happening, or to tell what to do. And suddenly these things are not available. These tools that these practices that we use are not available, and we get the problem out there, the actual root cause, right? The actual problem. And I don't think that the problem is that we cannot spend time with people. I think that every time when we face challenges related with remote work, the question should be, what's the real problem in there? And most likely it became more visible because of the fact that we are working remotely, but
Hmm.
because we are getting back to the office and potentially uh, you know um, hide the problem, it doesn't mean that we solve the problem. And for a lot of cases, it's not for every company, but for a lot of cases, when we really got into deep discussions, okay, so what's the actual problem here? What are we trying to solve here? Because remote work is not a problem. Remote work is uh, environment in which we noticed we have a problem. And these companies who really were open for these discussions and addressed the actual root causes for the problems, they came out stronger and better in their performance because they solved the actual problem. And later, some people want to, be remote, some people don't want. That's fine, but it's not the center of a conversation. And for me, it's not a separate topic. It's like it's just multiplier of the things that happening anyways.
I really like that. I really like that because that's very similar to things I've seen, and indeed, um, we were so used to some things in the office, and then we might be able to solve some things and not notice that there is a problem. Where it's remote, it becomes very visible. We need to use other tools. I really like that you said it as well. Maybe you do have also the advantage because of your musical background that you're better at picking up some clues, because I think it might make sense, because sometimes people say, well, remote, we don't have any of that anymore. At the same time, I also know that we are over everybody overestimates their way of how they can read body language. There's a lot of research on that as well. um, but yeah, it's interesting to think about all of these things. Um, that's and so when you say I haven't been going back, or I keep doing remote, is that a conscious decision from your point, from your side?
Mm, yes, most of the time. I mean, if there is a need from client side. They request to come for a particular reason, for a particular workshop, for example, if the whole team is on site and I would be the only, facilitator who's remote. Maybe it doesn't make sense. But most of the time I stay remote because a lot of teams, even if they are local teams, they have at least one, two, three, some team members that are not local. We don't have local presence. And then it doesn't matter anymore, because for me, the worst scenario is that then you have the whole team working as an on-site and you have one person trying to listen one ear what's happening there in the meeting room, for example, because it's so not inclusive. For me, the rule is if one is remote, everybody is remote. And then we become inclusive. And for example, you mentioned this body language thing, right? That, when we are being together, we might read our body language easier. But at the same time, it's assumption that we are good at reading body language. And then once again, we make a lot of things implicit. For example, we might read body language wrong, and because we are together and we feel so confident, we just forget to validate that assumption. That, for example, the person might cross, his hands, and you suddenly say, "Oh, that person is potentially against this idea because he's blocking himself, and he's sitting like that." Or
Mhm.
maybe it was just really cold in the room, and you're just trying to get warm, and a lot of things.
Oh yeah, I recognize that one.
So there are a lot of things where we still need to validate these assumptions. And sometimes in remote setting, it's easier in a way that we have less temptation to overestimate our capabilities. And it's a good reminder that we need to validate these things explicitly. And then we do that. The remote setting is even more convenient, I would say.
Yeah, I think with remote sites, but I've seen it with myself, with double checking much more. And indeed, so we need to make it explicit or ask people explicit if they're having a bad day or whatever, because I don't see how you walk around. And so if I'm in the office, I might see that, okay, yeah, you might not have a good day, but if we can come to some kind of agreement and the safety that people feel okay to say, like, you know what, I haven't slept well today, and today I might be a little bit grumpier than I'm usually am. If I can say that into a remote team, that will actually help out a lot of communications, and not, oh, what did I do wrong because Eve is reacting very badly today. It has to do with me and nothing with the other person.
Yeah,
um
what I noticed about this part, what you mentioned, is that actually in remote setting we have less elephant in the room situations. For example, then, as you said, there is a person who is quite actively acting grumpy, and then we are on site, and everybody is just reading that person's body language, and they all assume that, oh, potentially it's my fault, maybe I did something wrong, but I'm not afraid to ask because it should be obvious for some reason. And in remote setting, no, you just tell, because you know that people can't read you. And it became in a very good habit to just tell
Mhm.
people things without, leaving them guessing and potentially blaming themselves. Because a lot of people, or at least more than I would originally think, are very self-centric. And I've been in a lot of situations where there is this elephant in the room, and there are, five other people, and each of them thinks that it's their fault. you know.
Okay, that's indeed, yeah, something I agree with. Okay, let's move to that other topic, and you kind of already talked a little bit about it. What's the book? And by now, I hope I have a better chance now, because I did find another. Is that the one that you're
Yes,
talking
that's the
about?
one, Alchemy. Oh, this book is just brilliant. Actually, it opened the door for me when I was switching industries from financial industry to tech industry. That was my door opener, because I was going into a job interview that I was definitely underqualified. And I was so afraid that they will start asking all of these technical questions I have no clue how to answer. So, and I was reading this book at the time. So I just entered the room and said, Okay, so I'm reading this very interesting book right now. It's called Surprising Things About Ideas That Don't Make Sense. And there was this one story, and I just started telling a story, and then the end said, "So what do you think about that?" And there were all of these, like managers and engineering directors, and we're like, what the hell is happening? But then one of them just started laughing, and we're like started talking with me about this book, and yeah, it really don't make sense, but actually it makes sense. And then we started having this conversation about overall thinking patterns, and I got an offer like a week later. So that was
Wow, that doesn't make sense, and at the same time, it does make sense.
Yeah, but actually,
So
it was not
how?
the latest book I read. If you're more interested into my latest readings, because that was a door opener for in my career,
Mhm.
because like when I was switching careers. But now the latest book I read was Coaching for Learning by Joel Tossi, and I really liked the book because it was a constant reminder that we should always know why we're coaching, why we're doing the coaching in the first place. And if we're doing it for learning, this is a very specific goal to have in mind. And the coaching might be different if it's for long-term learning purposes and how the learning happens. So that was sort of a mixture from agile practices to psychology to some even educational things. So yeah, I can recommend that as well.
That's really interesting to talk about that. Meanwhile, I think I was able to find that book as well. So let's bring it on. That's even a bigger risk because now I didn't have the exact title, but that's the
Yes,
one.
this is correct from first time.
Yes. So yeah, woohoo. But I do indeed. I haven't read that book, but I've heard about it as well. Because I really like that you add this book because I think um, for me as an agile coach, when I was working as an agile coach, the goal is not just to teach somebody that can do everything after I've learned, but actually learning that a person can grow beyond me. That's the goal for me. It's not the person that and I've coached quite a few people in the last 20 years that have moved way beyond me in certain directions in all kind of things. And I always like that because for me that's it's like I'm now learning from these people, and I think that's for me is a big part of okay, I gave people some kind of direction, some kind of ideas on how to improve themselves, how to learn, and you know what, they moved in that direction, and in the same class or the same group someone else moved in the complete other direction. That kind of shows to me like I didn't show them what to learn, but I learned them tricks on how to learn. And
Oh, I
that's
love that.
it's I also hope that I can do that with my children, but only time will tell, of course, because right now they're in the teenage age, like yeah, dad, and so I'm mostly learning. I always say that I train my daughter to go compete in the Olympics of eye rolling because I'm really good at that. So having her so it's a different kind of thing. But yeah, it's but I do indeed hope that we can I can teach them, or we as a parent group of parents, we can learn them some things there. So and so, but now I feel I talked more about that last book than you. Um, did you? How did you encounter that book? How did you come across? Because you said already you're learning from all kind of directions. How do you typically find books like this?
This particular book I found at a conference. So if I see a book stand, that is a sign for me to just, change my direction and run away if I don't want to spend a lot of money in there. But I just didn't do that. And I ended up buying some books, including this one. And what attracted my attention was this part for learning, right? But there is a very particular objective what we want to achieve with this coaching, and I like that it's focusing on a target audience instead of focusing on a coach. Meaning that it's not the purpose for me to teach, it's a purpose for my target audience to learn. and it's a very different thing. It's like with the same communication, like, is your purpose to tell what you want to say, or your purpose is to be heard, right? And even go deeper, like understood and so on. So I liked how it was phrased, and actually, right now, I'm using it in some frameworks for adjusting the trainings I already have or creating new ones, like adding particular elements, because it has really nice insights on how people learn, how people get information in the first place. Once they get it, how do we remember it, right? What are the feedback loops in our brains? How do we evaluate things? It resonated with my own self-reflection a lot of times. So yeah, I can recommend it.
Yeah, I really like that. It's yeah, and I really, again, like you say, you learn something at the conference, and you can run away with it and use it, or you can ignore it. Like everybody has, of course, always that choice, and that's for me one of the, well, both positive and negative sides about this podcast. I learn about so many new books that, yeah, I don't have time anymore to read all of these. And yeah, so the books from Joel and Dion, I know the previous one. I can't come up. They wrote something about dojos, creating your own dojos. That was already on my list to read. I didn't even think about this one, but it's probably even, yeah. It feels like a follow up. It's probably totally not true, but it feels a little bit like, okay, this is the kind of thing where we want. How could we learn, teach people learning new stuff and things like that. So, thanks for bringing again a very interesting or two interesting books up.
Yeah, and
Thanks.
I think that we should be conscious about how we read as well, because in the end of the day, we should also have our own purpose why we're reading this book. And
Mhm.
I think it's okay if sometimes we read just particular parts of a book because we have particular purpose and what the outcome we want to have from particular information. And this book is written in a way that you can cherry pick particular parts if you are not interested in a whole thing, which is also good for, let's call, work literature.
I really like that, and that kind of reminds me of a completely different book that now I'm very tempting to add. Let me show, because I really
Oh,
like that one. It's a very interesting book, and people laughed a lot with me about this book when I read it. Let me. I need to bring it on screen, so I need to do a few clicks before I can. Now I can bring it on. Where is my other mouse? Yeah, so here. So the book I'm talking about is How to Read a Book.
ah.
And so many people like, well, how did you read a book? But indeed, what that part of the book was like, what's a good way or an intelligent way of reading? Like, it's kind of makes the. I was thinking about reading a book about speed reading, but that was actually kind of the opposite of speed reading. It was like, how could you take the time to really digest the book, and like, and part of these are also used in techniques for speed reading. It was like, okay, read the index, read the first page of a chapter, read the last page of a chapter, read them, and then indeed decide, do I want to read the book? Do I want to read the full book? Is that a book that I need to read cover to cover? And it actually, it was the first book that made me think, oh, I can actually stop reading a book. Because before, of course, if you're coming from a read, I'm also a person who like to read a lot, but for me, reading in my youth, is, of course, these are stories, so you read them cover to cover. Workbooks, sometimes there are things like, okay, it's good, I know this idea, but maybe I don't need it now, but it's good that I know a little bit about that. And so, especially as a coach, there might be things like, okay, now I know the basic concept, and the details, maybe I don't need to do it now. I need to read it at the moment that I need it, or something like that. I would not do that before. Before I read this book, I would always read it cover to cover, even if there were books that were hard to read, and I might be restarting and like, come on, this is a hard book, but I didn't want to quit reading the book. I might restart again because maybe I didn't get it, and after this book, it's like, okay, maybe at this point, this book is not the perfect book for me to read at this moment. It still might be good, might be bad for me, whatever, but it's definitely not at this moment. And I did learn, okay, read these, the index, read a couple of other things, try to understand a little bit what's the book, and then see if it's a book that I can read in multiple parts, decide which parts will I read and which parts will I skip or read later. And that's something I really learned from that book. It's yeah,
But this
I
is
think
so
many.
interesting. I think that this deep understanding that we have to finish what we started, it goes cross borders, right? We are in completely different countries and completely different culture systems, but we both have it. And I know people from even different continents that still have it. And this whole idea of, oh, maybe I can quit something if it doesn't bring value for me, and it might be more valuable to stop doing something than to have it finished, just to add a tick that I'm done with that and I completed it. um this is
And
actually,
losing all the energy
yeah,
and
and
life.
time
Yeah,
and alternative costs, what you could have done during that time. But no, somehow a lot of people still believe that it's value in finishing itself, right? Not questioning about, okay, so what I'm learning here, what I'm gaining here, and how I'm
exactly.
going to use it.
I really like that. So yeah, that's indeed a lot that I needed to learn. I'm not, I won't say that I'm good at that, but I'm already way better than I was like 10 years ago. Because indeed at some point, a lot of stuff, especially I'm past 50, so at this point in time, I don't have much time to waste to say like, okay, I'll keep doing everything until eternity. No, if it doesn't bring me joy, it doesn't bring me value, it doesn't bring me money, if it doesn't bring me anything, I won't do it. If it brings me one of these, I can still not do it, but because if it might not be enough. But if, yeah, it's a conscious choice. And it might be for, and I've coached many people that, yeah, but it brings me money, yeah, but it tears down so many other things that maybe money isn't the only thing
Yeah.
choice to do. And so that's something, and sometimes it is, if you're, I've lived off welfare so enough to know that at some point you need money to live your life, so at that point you will do anything to stay alive basically, and to help whatever. But I'm in a different part of my life, and maybe I can do it more because I like to do stuff.
Hmm.
And like this podcast, I'm not paid for it. There might be other things that I do that I like, that I still want to get paid for, because okay, I need to have a living, and I think it's brings also value in that kind of sense. But yeah, it's, these are all choices. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's so important that we realize it's not just starting. It's, well, in agile we talk about stop starting, start finishing, but sometimes we should also be realizing that maybe it's okay to stop it if it doesn't bring anything.
And
Uh,
if you make a conscious choice to stop something, it's also considered finished, because you made a decision what you do with that, right? It's not that it's in progress hanging in there. So
yeah, it's yeah, there are things that I stop, and that's thanks to many coaches that I've had. Thinking about Joanna Rotman now, most of it, because I had some conversations where she said at some point, like, I don't know, remember the details anymore, but it was like, yeah, this is actually why you keep doing it. And I was like, okay, that's a really good question to ask.
Mhm.
Is what is it bringing to me? And sometimes it's like it still brings me value. I keep doing it. And sometimes it's like, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to quit and bring energy somewhere else. So that's a very valuable thing. Thanks for bringing that up. I want to move to, for me, one of the most interesting questions about, well, especially after conversations like that, we already went into all kinds of directions. What's a question that I didn't ask? And oh no, sorry, I'm going. Where? Why did I? Uh, yeah, I did this the thing. What's the question? Do you think I should also ask you? And what's the answer? I thought I was clicking somewhere wrong. Sorry. Um,
um based on our past few parts of a conversation, um, it stimulated me to think about some lateral thinking techniques. And I think that it might be interesting to talk about questions as a tool to drive conversation. And it would be interesting to talk what are your questions, and I can share mine, of course, that you find powerful in working with people, that unlocks good conversations and helps with coaching or organizational improvement.
Wow, that's indeed something very powerful. Well, one of the things, well, this question, what's the question do you think I should also ask you? It's something I've used also in job interviews, for example,
Okay.
because I think it's an interesting one at the end that, okay, did I forget something? Um, but another question, and I'm using it both in job interviews as in all kind of things, all kind of conversations, is how do you think things are going? I even dare to do that in the middle of a in the middle of a job interview, because I might think it's going really well. Both I ask that both as a candidate and as a person who's interviewing people, because at some point I might feel like, hey, this is going really well, and maybe the person that is interviewing me thinks it's really shitty. I prefer to learn it during the interview while I have time to adapt it then afterwards when they say, well, you failed because you forgot to answer that question, it's like, no. So that's something I've started to ask a lot in interviews, but also in connections with in one-on-ones or other kind of things in performance reviews. And how is this conversation going? It's always been very surprising about what I've learned. And well, hopefully we are aligned, and sometimes we are aligned on this is not going anywhere.
Mhm.
Okay, if both of us we feel that, do we feel that we can adjust it and realign, or do we just want to close the conversation, which is also fine? We talked just about stopping something. Well, let's not waste time. If after 10 minutes you feel this is not the company I want to work for, and I feel the same, like let's stop the conversation. Let's not waste time. And I've saved interviews in both directions already by asking that question that the person said, well, I feel this or that, and that's like, whoa, okay, maybe we misunderstood. Let's recalibrate. So that's a question I like to ask.
I really like this question. I'm not asking directly the same question, but if I'm having interviews, in the end, I ask not as a question, but maybe as a request that if there are any assumptions that you will use in your decision making, please get back to me and verify. Just as a reminder that there is still maybe
Hmm.
you might not understand that now because right now, let's say you don't have questions. If we align that we don't have any more questions, but then what happens that people get to the discussion about how it went, and we're like, oh, but actually, I do have some question, but from what I heard, I think the answer is this. So my reminder is like, if that happens, get back and verify. Let's not make a final decision on assumptions. So yeah, but the questions I like and how I thought about this question overall was when we were talking about reading and that we thought automatically that we have to finish a book. So the question that would help in this case, and it's helpful in a lot of organizational cases, is what if the opposite were true? So that's a golden question for me. Then we have to solve problems, we have to think about organizational improvements, we have to think about people growth, and we're just so much affected by all the educational system, by our families, by cultures, and so on, and we just take things for granted how we do things. And in a lot of cases, actually, it may not be the truth. It may be the opposite. And when we, say it out loud or visualize what would happen if we do the opposite, then things that don't make sense suddenly make sense. So it helps a lot. Um, and what the newest question I have, actually, it's maybe 2 weeks old. So very, very fresh question I added to my toolbox. Um, it's for very particular situations when something bad happens and there is a conflict. Um, And I didn't have much opportunity to coach people through conflict previously. Um, but what I learned is that people who are in conflict and they come to me and they feel bad and their emotions are there's emotional overload and so on. And what I ask, what does this situation tell about the people that were involved in the situation? For example, if a person comes and the person was being blamed for something, or there was particular type of communication that might be violent communication or disrespectful communication, what does it tell about the people who were doing that? And the purpose of this question is not that I'm using it often. I just created awareness for it because I think it might be helpful, and it's helpful not only at work but also in family context. I don't know, your kid is being bullied and then comes to you and like, what does it tell about the bully? And I think it brings a lot of empathy and emotional intelligence, and it also helps us realize that it's not all about us, and a lot of things are actually, we shouldn't be so self-centric, and there might be things on the other side. So what the situation tells about the other side, what's happening in there. Maybe there are some problems, maybe we actually need not to be sad, we need to help. um, so that's quite powerful for me. um, and
I really like that. I really like that because it's indeed, well, like we said before, we can be transparent about and ask some assumptions, but this is, yeah, kind of the opposite or the other side. Like, okay, what could that be? And we're kind of creating new assumptions, but not go with the default assumption about something. And in that sense, we have again more questions to verify, more things
yeah,
to check.
it
And
opens conversation again, basically.
exactly, and that helps a lot in the conversation. So that's very powerful ways to do that. And again, if we're talking using words again, we talked earlier about remote work. That helps a lot of these kind of things, uh, because it's what is needed much more on these kind of things. So thanks for sharing that, because these are just a couple of questions, but that actually help in ways how we can broaden our conversation, broaden our worldview to create more empathy for other people, and that's usually a good thing. Um, I would.
Yeah, and
I'm
overall,
tempting to say always, but I don't like to use always, so that's why I'm saying usually. Sorry, I interrupted you. What you wanted to say
no,
something?
I just wanted to add that overall, I don't know, previously when I was learning, I was looking a lot for answers. And, the more and more what I do when I learn, I'm looking for more questions. And I don't know, it's somehow shapes thinking differently because, of course, we will need to figure out and find some answers at some point. But what I learned that people who ask questions, they own the conversation, they create direction, they create focus. And in my environment and my job in particular, it's actually very powerful. And yeah, right now a lot of my learning is based not how to find smarter answers, but how to find more powerful questions to bring to the conversation.
Yes, I think that's well, yeah. For me, that's a lot of what I'm doing is indeed making sure asking much more questions. Although my role has shifted now to engineering manager, sometimes people think, "Oh, that means you now have to make all decisions." And for me, it's like, no, I think I can still do that with asking a lot of questions. Yes, sometimes I need to dodge the bullet and make some
Yeah.
decisions, but the longer I can wait with that and the more I can do that with other people asking questions, actually the better it will help at some point, I think. So that's thank you for adding these things. Okay, I want to move to that next question. Who do you think I should ask next? And I think you had at least one person that you had in mind that you wanted to invite.
Oh yeah, I didn't know, but I can add a lot of people. So I definitely should have asked what if the opposite were true, and then
That
created a
was an
list.
assumption.
Yeah, that was an assumption, but I didn't validate. So I will bring the longer list. But my first person on my mind was Cheryl Hammond, uh, who I met at Orlando's conference, Agile 2023, and she's amazing human being as a first thing, but she's also heart and soul of the conference. She's coming to Vilnius for our conferences, which, in my opinion, is huge effort to come
And
to.
I think that's her, right?
This is her. So she's amazing, and I'm pretty sure the conversation with her would be unconventional and insightful.
Thanks for that. And so we'll definitely invite her and see where we're going with that conversation. So that's indeed, you only sent me one name. You can definitely send me more people later after it. Is there one more maybe that you can now think of that would be interesting to invite? I know I'm putting you on the spot, so that's perfectly fine. Say no, just one, but you can add more if you want now.
There is one amazing agile coach sitting right behind the wall with me right now, who's my partner and our consultancy co-founder. She is Gabriela Domanita. So if I can add one more person, she's definitely the first on my mind and the first I could see around right now.
Okay, well, that's definitely, well, I would assume you can send me the contact details.
Lithuanian names are difficult, so I'm not assuming you can write it down just from hearing.
Yeah, I was lucky to. Well, I actually, when my was it, I would say high school friend, but that's not true because we didn't went to school together. But I had a friend from age 13 or something that is actually living in Vilnius, that is married to a woman called Agne as well. So that your
Hmm.
name in that sense was
Oh,
not
I'm lucky.
not new. So that's but yeah, that doesn't mean that I know all other names. That's a completely different kind of thing. At the same time, I think it's really interesting for me. I really like sometimes how learning new names. It's also brings sometimes it's the same name but in different kind of spelling and different kind of things. It learns us also something about our history, how some names, yeah, have some common history, and other names totally only exist in just a couple of countries. So that's a different kind of thing. Um, but thank you very much for your time, because we spent like, yeah, a little more than an hour and a half or something like that on this conversation. If people would want to contact you, what would be a good way to contact you?
I'm quite responsive on LinkedIn, so people can definitely find me
And
there.
that's your.
This is right, yeah. My name and surname spelled correctly, so you'll find me.
I didn't make a copy paste mistake, so that's good. um, so that's but yeah, it's really, and I can say the same thing, because indeed we had to, well, find a moment to organize this, and that went really well, really quick conversations, so that was, I can agree to the fact that it's easy to connect and have that kind of things. Yeah, for me, I'm really grateful to having spent this time with you tonight, because I think I've learned a lot. Your interest, it goes very broad, but in similar kind of directions as me, but much broader. And yeah, I've learned again some books and some other things. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed every minute of that. So thank you. I'm grateful. Okay. Have a good night.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of Agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other Agilists.